This one choice could determine who keeps your house after you die. So Kim, what is the difference between tenants in common and joint tenants?
The main difference between tenants in common and joint tenants is how you own the property and whether it comes with rights of survivorship. So say people co-own a property and they're not related, maybe they don't want the other person to inherit their share. So maybe it's siblings, maybe it's business partners, maybe it's friends, and if you want to co-own the home, you could own it equally as tenants in common, each as to a separate share. You could own it 50-50, so each person has their own separate share. Could be in equal shares, unequal shares, so 40-60, 70-30, but either way, each person's independent share would pass to those who they've designated to receive the property in a will, or if they don't have a will, based on the laws of that local jurisdiction, so the laws of intestacy. With rights of survivorship, with joint tenants, it comes with that rights of survivorship. So what that means is the surviving co-owner would automatically receive those person's share of the property. So if there's two co-owners and when they own it with joint tenants with the rights of survivorship, the survivor of them would then receive the entire property. Doesn't have to go through probate, you don't have to go through the court process, it just happens automatically by operation of law. When we're talking about joint tenants, also comes the concept of tenants by the entirety, which is a heightened form of joint tenancy, only available to married couples, and it also has some asset protections. So if there's a judgment, a non-tax related judgment in either party's name, it may not attach to the property. When I say attach to the property, it means it may not have to be paid at the time of the closing.
Biggest difference then between tenants in common and joint tenancy is the rights of survivorship.
Yep, absolutely.
Makes sense. Who actually gets the house when someone dies? So Kim, you mentioned survivorship rights. What does that look like?
If people own property as tenants in common, meaning they each have an independent share of the property, is going to pass, their share of the property is going to pass whoever they've designated in a will. If, however, they own with rights of survivorship, so maybe say they own as joint tenants with the rights of survivorship, which would be non-married couples that co-own property, and they want to make sure that the survivor of them becomes the owner after their passing, or if it's tenants by the entirety, married couples, either way, the surviving co-owner would automatically inherit the property. So immediately upon the passing of one co-owner, and I always snap my fingers because it happens automatically, you don't have to go to court, you don't have to file any documents, it just happens automatically by operation of law, that's what we call it, and it just means that the surviving co-owners will automatically receive that property.
Got it. The courts have entered the equation. So Kim, what does it mean when a home does go into probate?
It means that there's no surviving co-owner that has rights of survivorship. So it could be a situation where the property is owned as tenants in common and someone's share has not automatically passed to a co-owner. Could be a situation like that. And then ultimately the court needs to decide who's going to receive that independent share. So probate can mean a variety of things. In some jurisdictions, it's just a matter of filing a document or two with the local courthouse. In other jurisdictions, it's a much more complicated process. It could require several months, sometimes over a year waiting period, making sure that creditors have the opportunity to provide notice and make a claim against any rights or interest in any property that that deceased person may have had. So it can be a really lengthy process. Don't hate on probate. Sometimes it's complicated, but it's really just the court's supervision process to make sure that someone who's passed away, that their rights and wishes are being complied with. So it's a great option for people who want to make sure that the court is supervising that. Maybe they don't have people in their family that they trust. Maybe they want to make sure that their will is followed to a T. Maybe their children don't get along or there's more strained relationships. So it's a great option, but of course there are ways to avoid the probate process. So definitely reach out to your favorite real estate attorney, probate attorney, estate planning attorney if you want to hear more about those options.
Would it be safe to say, and this might be nuanced, but would it be safe to say that if you're on title tenants in common and you don't have a will, that the property will go into probate if you pass away?
Maybe. Depends on your state. There are certain states, including Virginia and DC, that have transfer on death deeds. So I like, when I talk about transfer on death deeds, I always describe it as a beneficiary designation. So maybe when you have a 401k plan or a retirement plan, you've logged in online, you've typed in a name of a person who will automatically receive that property. That bypasses the probate process. In Virginia and DC, we're lucky to have those options. So you can contact a real estate attorney, a title company. We can help you record a deed designating a beneficiary. And so in that situation, even if a person does not have survivorship rights, so they don't have an automatic co-owner, you can designate that beneficiary and still circumvent the probate process. In Maryland, we do not have transfer on death deeds. We have a few other options, including life estate deeds, but it's not as streamlined of a process. And every year there's new legislation talking about maybe the option of adding transfer on death deeds. But if you have that option in your state, it's a good option to avoid the probate process without necessarily going through the full process of having a will. Even if you have a will, you still would have to go through the probate process. You'd still have to introduce that will and record a copy with the local probate division of the circuit court.
Why would I ever need a real estate attorney?
Good question. So maybe we talk about what a real estate attorney is. A real estate attorney is a person who went to law school and has passed the local bar exam for their state. So it's an attorney who's specializing in real estate law. And you may need one for a variety of reasons. Even under the large real estate umbrella, there's several different niche areas of practice. So what I describe for my role here at Allied Title and Escrow is a very niche transactional practice, meaning we help people buy and sell homes. We want to make sure buyers aren't taking on any legal issues associated with title. So it's a transactional practice. It's a matter of making sure the paperwork is transferred from the seller to the buyer, and we are ensuring that that clean, clear, marketable title is being conveyed if that's what was promised in the contract. There are other types of real estate attorneys, including litigation attorneys. So when I say litigation, usually that means something has gone wrong. So if there's an issue, maybe there's a lack of disclosure. Maybe someone bought a house in Maryland and they don't feel like maybe there was a mold issue and it wasn't properly disclosed. Or maybe the buyer felt like the seller hadn't provided enough information about the condition of the home. When it was built, when the roof was replaced, those types of things. You can hire an attorney to bring an action against the sellers for lack of disclosure. Could be a boundary line issue, could be fraud and forgery, but those are the attorneys that are going to court to try to remedy legal issues associated with your title or ownership. And then of course there's landlord-tenant attorneys. So that would be attorneys that are mainly dealing with lease agreements, either representing a tenant or representing a landlord. Landlord would be the person that owns the property. Tenant would be the person with permission to stay in that property with the landlord's consent. So different types of real estate attorneys. We all have our sort of niche area of practice, but luckily here at Allied Title and Escrow, we have 5 different attorneys on staff. So you will have the option to work with many of us, and we can provide that legal service as part of our package.
The buyer's agent represents the buyer, listing agent represents the seller. At Allied, as the title company, we represent the contract, the sales contract. So as a title attorney, would it be safe to say that is, like you've been saying, like a particular niche of being a real estate attorney?
Sure, yeah. So as the settlement attorney, settlement agent, we are working to make sure that the seller conveys clean, clear, and marketable title consistent with the contract terms. Or if there's any carve-outs or caveats, of course that can be agreed upon in the contract, but we're making sure that the contract is followed and that the buyers aren't going to receive any surprises down the line. We don't want them to buy the house and all of a sudden 5 years down the line discover that there's an issue. Maybe a lien, maybe there was work that was done on the property right before closing and the contractor was never compensated. We don't want any surprises, so we are there to stomp out those surprises, making sure the buyers understand what they're purchasing. So we don't represent the buyers, we don't represent the sellers while we're acting as the settlement agent, but there are attorneys that can represent a buyer or a seller. And if another title company is acting as the settlement agent, then we sometimes do step in and represent the buyers, or we can represent the sellers to make sure their interests are being protected. We can review the documents, making sure they're signing the necessary documents. We can review the title commitments, which is that other settlement agent's agreement to ensure the transaction. We can help explain those processes. So if we're acting as the settlement agent, we're not representing either party, but if we are not acting as the settlement agent, we definitely have the capability, training, experience, and expertise to help out those buyers and sellers.
So Kim, how would you explain taking title? What does that mean?
Title means having an ownership interest in property. So we get the question a lot, what's the difference between title and a deed? Title means the actual right to own the property or have an interest in it. And the deed is the legal document that reflects that ownership interest. So if you're taking title, you're going to be reflected as the grantee or the buyer on that deed. And it means that you have some sort of rights associated with that property. So the right to use it, the right to possess it, the right to lease it, that's what having an ownership interest in that property means.
Perfect. So is that the same thing as having interest in the house?
Yes, and what's interesting is you can have different types of interest. So you can have a current interest right now, or you could have a future interest down the line. So we spoke a little bit about transfer on death deeds. Transfer on death deeds means designating a beneficiary that will receive the property upon your passing. So in that situation, if someone's designated as the beneficiary down the line, they have a future interest in the property. Right? It's not right now, but down the line and upon the occurrence of an event, like someone passing away, they will automatically, and again, I always snap my fingers to show that it means it happens automatically, quickly, immediately upon passing, but at that point, they would have a future interest. At the time the transfer on death deed is, they have a future interest, but upon the passing, then they would have a current interest because they are next in line. So then they will automatically receive ownership of the property.
Got it.
You can also have a life estate interest, which means you have the right to live in the property for your lifetime. So that's a different type of interest. So someone can be the owner of the property. So maybe I buy 123 Main Street and I want to allow you to live there for any period of time, your lifetime, or maybe for the next 5 years. You can actually write that into the deed. So I could say, although I want to be the owner, Leah, for the duration of her life, can continue to live in the property. But upon her passing, it would either revert back to me, or I could designate future people that may have a future interest in the property upon the occurrence or ending of that actual event.
I feel like we see a lot of those types of properties in the Baltimore County, Baltimore City area.
Yeah, we see that's a life estate deed, and we see that because we don't have the option of transfer on death deeds in Maryland. So a transfer on death deed has a similar effect where you can transfer the property during your lifetime, but retain your ability to stay in the property. So it's another estate planning tool that many estate planning attorneys will utilize or speak with you about as part of a larger estate planning process.
And if someone wants to turn that into what would be called fee simple, a fee simple property, that's possible.
It's possible. So fee simple just means you own everything.
Yeah.
So it could mean something like you own the ground as well as the physical structure, which we see a lot in Baltimore, rather than subject to ground rent.
Yeah.
But it could also mean that you have the entire interest. So there's no future interest designated. It just means fee simple, they keep it simple, you're the only owner.
Even the thought of this puts me in panic mode. But what is a short sale?
A short sale means that the seller or current owner of the property doesn't have enough money or doesn't have enough equity to satisfy all of the debts associated with the property. So sometimes referred to as underwater, means they don't have enough equity or money in the property. So if the property is currently valued at $400,000, but for whatever reason they have a loan that's higher, maybe the loan is $450,000. They're short, as you can see. They don't have enough money or equity in the property to satisfy those debts. So there are options for those people, including negotiating directly with the banks to see if the bank will take a lesser amount. And when that happens and when the bank approves it, it's called a short sale because you're essentially shorting the bank. You're making sure that they are paid off, and in exchange, the bank is agreeing to accept those funds. They may realize there are financial difficulties. Maybe that person has had some life changes that make it more difficult. Maybe they've lost their job, deaths in the family, depression, mental health issues. But for whatever reason, the bank has made a calculated decision to accept less money and just close out the loan.
So what would be the difference between a short sale and a foreclosure?
Short sale is a court-approved bank sale where the bank is saying we've looked at the file and we're agreeing to take less money and release your deed of trust or your mortgage. But with a foreclosure, it means that the bank has acted because you've stopped paying them. So the bank is moving forward and has the court, in most states it requires court approval, some states it doesn't, but either way, the bank is moving forward saying that they are going to sell the property. Since they have an interest in the property, they've loaned that borrower money, and in exchange that borrower gave them an interest in the property. They collateralized the property, so accordingly the bank is moving forward saying we want to be paid. The property must be sold in order for that to happen, and we'll take whatever money is associated with this.
When it's still early enough that someone might be weighing their options, that short sale might be the way to go, and don't stop making the payments entirely. Contact the bank and see if they're willing to work with you, because that sounds like that's the more collaborative process over foreclosure.
Definitely, and frankly better for people's credit.
Yeah.
If you go through the foreclosure process and you have a foreclosure on your
7 years,
credit,
it's on your credit, I think.
it's going to be harder down the line to get a new property. But a short sale, again, is a collaborative process, as you indicated. So it means the bank has taken a look at the file and is agreeing to release that deed of trust. So it will show off on the credit as paid in full.
Yep.
But accordingly, there may be a lack of payment history, so your credit may be damaged in the sense, because normally by the time people get to a short sale, they've missed a few payments, and it's again that collaborative process. But it could be more of a situation where property values have decreased. Maybe you're in an area with a lot of change. Maybe a large company in a small town has recently gone bankrupt, and now all of those people have lost their jobs, and there's just not a strong real estate market because everyone's in the same boat. Luckily, in the DC metro area, we're lucky because our market's fairly diversified. People are in different fields. We have education, we have government, we have private sector, big business. So usually we're a little bit more diversified, but you can see how those issues can trigger a bad market in more rural jurisdictions.
Why does quiet title sound like you want me to shut up?
Quiet title is an action that someone can bring. You could ask the court to quiet title. What that means is the court would make a determination about who owns the property. So if there's a boundary line dispute, you could ask the court to quiet title or make a decision about where that property line is and who owns what portion of the property. If the property has been used, maybe say there's an encroachment. So maybe say there's a property line and property one, their fence is onto the neighbor's property. Maybe it's say by 10 feet. If that has we call it encroachment because the fence is encroaching onto the neighbor's property, but maybe say that encroachment has been there for an extended period of time, maybe 35 years. In most jurisdictions, that's more than enough time for the court to say, it's been there long enough and you haven't complained, you haven't made it an issue. Accordingly, we're going to declare that portion of the property to be property of property one's property owners. So quiet title is just a determination to make sure the court is saying who owns what portion of property or who has what type of interest in the property.
Got it. So there could be arguments for someone to win a scenario like that if they were always encroaching on the property for the last 3 decades. And
exactly. It's just a determination of who owns what property and which portion of the property. So again, if there's a boundary line dispute, the court could step in and say, we believe that John Smith owns this portion of the property, and we believe that Leah owns this portion of the property. But it could be something like a fraud transaction. So the court steps back in, quiets title, settles things down. They make that determination. They say, we've reviewed all the facts and findings. We don't believe this was an appropriate transfer. Although this person created a power of attorney, we don't believe that the person who signed that power of attorney really ever had capacity. Maybe they have a mental deficiency. Maybe they didn't understand what they were doing. Maybe a medical diagnosis like dementia. But for whatever reason, they signed the document, got notarized, passed on, and accordingly, maybe the person who was designated as the attorney in fact, or the person able to sign documents on behalf of the principal, maybe that person executed a deed transferring the property to themselves, and maybe that's not what the family wanted, and maybe it was not a proper use of legal documents, so you can try to revert that process back, and in that situation, that's what we call quiet title.
Got it.
The court's making a determination about who owns what.
so what if the government decided tomorrow that your home is no longer yours? This is called what, Kim? Eminent domain?
Eminent domain.
Let's talk about it.
Eminent domain is the government taking of property for a public purpose, taking of private property. So example could be for all those houses that are along 495 on the Beltway, if the government decides they want to expand the highway and build another lane, maybe another 4 lanes might help us out, but if they want to take that additional property, they can purchase that property from those homeowners. They purchase it for fair market value, and they would have to demonstrate public purpose, value to the public associated with it. But if that determination's made and everyone agrees, the courts agree, the counties agree, then the properties can be purchased from those individuals for fair market value. It can be kind of a crazy process, as you can imagine, because the homeowners have their understanding of what the value of the property is. Ultimately, they only need to be paid fair market value, so it may be less than what those people feel they should be paid, and they don't necessarily have a right to object. They can go to the courts and they can object, and they can go to town hall meetings and let the county and local governments know how they feel about it, but ultimately, if the government believes that it's for the proper purpose and for public good, then the sale can go through, unfortunately. Or fortunately, maybe
Or
we all
fortunately,
appreciate
maybe.
the additional roads on the Beltway.
Yeah.
It could be anything. It could be the county saying they want to put in a new metro line. Right now, and we know in Maryland, they're putting in purple lines. So any houses that are between those two the red line U, anyone that's on that purple line, yep, may be getting fair market value for their property. So it's a crazy process, but you can imagine that we're in a situation, we're in a day and age where population density is high. There's a lot of houses everywhere, and if the government didn't have the ability to improve public works and put in more roads and mass stations, that could also be problematic for the area. So it's unfortunate for the people that go through the process, but ultimately, again, the backbone is a determination's being made that it's for the betterment of the community, betterment for the area, and the betterment for the majority of the population.
Makes sense.
There you go.